Welcome back to Brashenomics. I am Ben Brashen, and we've been talking a little bit about protecting your assets, growing your assets, and ultimately, just I think having happen to them what you want to have happen to them is sometimes something that you maybe have more control of than you think. John Hugg joins us, specializing in estate planning, business succession planning, and elder law, and is also a frequent speaker on these issues and host of seminars throughout the Seattle area. Well, first, welcome back, John. How are you?
Thanks, Ben. Good to be back. I'm doing well. You?
I'm pretty good.
Good. Congratulations on the anniversary.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Good job.
As you start, as my wife and I have more and more anniversaries in the future, and another child coming, there's a lot to start thinking about as far as the estate plan and wills and trusts and making sure money does what we want it to or expect it to.
Correct.
It doesn't always seem, at the ripe old age of 33, it's not really front of my mind, but it maybe should be.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be forefront in your mind at the ripe old age of 33. But if you start thinking about it sooner rather than later, again, things can be a lot easier, and you can, perhaps protect against, unexpected things that pop up. There are a number of threats to anyone's assets that are out there that we just can't really do anything about. So, in terms of the threat existing, but you can figure out how you want to address that threat and work around it to protect your assets, even though that threat exists.
Again, kind of controlling what you can control, and taking one threat on at a time in some ways.
Yeah. So I guess, in terms of asset protection, the first thing to think about is, what assets are at risk. So you've got your house, you've got your cars, bank accounts, retirement accounts, and those sort of things that are all at risk from various threats. So what are the different threats? To know how to plan to protect against that threat, you need to kind of know what that threat is in the first place. So,
you put a car alarm or what's the old thing, the club they used to put on a car?
Yeah. I still see them every now and then. Yeah, occasionally. So, but certainly one of the threats is going to be the threat of a lawsuit or the risk of a lawsuit. If you're out driving in your car and you hit somebody, you're probably going to get sued to recover for the damages. So, lawsuits are always a threat. Unfortunately, now this is probably the worst thing to bring up on your anniversary, but divorce is a threat without question. And there may or may not be some things you can do to protect against the threat of divorce. A spendthrift family member can also be a threat to assets. If they're going to burn through it, then they're not going to be preserved. Those assets won't make it down the line for generations to come.
Kids can be a threat to your savings too.
Kids are a natural threat to your savings, if you can even accumulate savings when you have kids. So, and then certainly, as we've been talking about on the show, the tax man is certainly a threat to your assets, and something that is I think going to be much more prevalent coming forward in years to come in terms of a threat to overall assets, and that is the cost of long-term care and perhaps uncovered medical expenses. Right now, we are at the starting end of all of the baby boomers turning 65. Roughly 10,000 baby boomers per day are turning 65, and that's set to continue for the better part of the next 20 years. So as those baby boomers age and they need assistance with their activities of daily living as they get older, we're probably going to be talking a lot more about the cost of long-term care and how to cover it, and so that can certainly be a threat to your assets as well.
So when people start thinking of, age, I guess, being a threat, financially, in a lot of different ways, right? You have the fact that you're probably not going to be working. You have the fact that your bills are probably going to go up. As you talked about, even long-term care or something along those lines. Right. When you start, and that's the one thing that's coming. Nobody I know has been able to stop it.
That's right.
What are some ways that you work with people to kind of, I guess, you can't eliminate that type of threat, but maybe soften the blow?
Right. So just some very simple ways to address some of those threats, and some of which are sort of outside the scope of what we're talking about here. Fairly basic in terms of protecting against a lawsuit. Insurance is what you would generally want to protect against a lot of lawsuits, good homeowners and auto insurance. In terms of a divorce, in certain circumstances, if you if you're coming into a marriage with assets, you may want to have a prenuptial agreement. But in most cases, if you're starting out, as a couple together and you're accumulating assets as you go, maybe not a whole lot you can do to protect against that. But there are some things that can be done through your estate plan that would protect that going forward, protect your assets from divorce going forward. So, for instance, what we do with couples is we would leave assets, through your will, leave assets in trust for your spouse. So instead of most people basically have what are called I love you wills. If they have estate planning at all, they've got an I love you will, which is I leave everything to my spouse if he or she survives me, and the spouse has the same identical will coming back. And so the twist here is that you would leave assets in trust for that spouse, because if the spouse has the assets in his or her name, then they are susceptible to creditors' claims, susceptible to divorce if there is a remarriage, and would be susceptible to paying for long-term care costs, and also to the IRS on the estate tax as well. So if you put those assets into trust, then in most cases you're going to be able to protect the surviving spouse against creditor claims, a divorce from a remarriage, and certainly the assets that are in the trust were not going to be in the name of the surviving spouse. So because they're outside the name of the surviving spouse, they won't be counted for estate tax purposes. So you can achieve estate tax savings there by implementing that strategy as well. And if the trust is drawn properly, it can also be used to enable you to qualify for certain public benefits that are available in certain circumstances when you are not able to care for yourself, to help pay for long-term care. And then the assets that wind up in that trust can be used to supplement your quality of life and improve your quality of life. And so you have basic benefits that help pay for the basic needs of housing and food and medical, and then the assets in the trust can be used for various things to make life better for you.
So here's a question, and because this is something that sounds like almost everybody should have. I don't know how many people are married in Washington State, but I imagine Greater Seattle there's 3.6 million people. Figure there's maybe 1 million marriages, maybe there's 750,000 marriages. What percentage of people do you think have this type of thing set up that makes so much sense, especially in the world of term life insurance, which is sometimes people don't think about, but all of a sudden you may get a lump sum of $500,000 or whatnot. Right. How many people, what percentage of people do you think have gone through the process to control what they really can control, to tackle this threat by use of somebody like yourself?
Yeah. Probably a very small percentage. I mean, the numbers on people who don't have estate plans, period, is somewhere, I think, around 40%, which is a seemingly shocking number.
They don't have anything.
They don't have anything. No estate planning documents or estate planning in any way. And I see every day people coming to me with estate plans that, from a bygone era. I had a client on Monday, came in, they had a estate plan drawn before their 2 children were born, and their children are now adults. They're almost my age, or at least one of them's almost my age, and they're operating off of something from the late 60s, actually. And so that type of planning isn't going to achieve these goals in this setting. So it's something that I think very few people have actually got set up. And I think you're absolutely right. Everybody should really be thinking about this at pretty much any age.
John, we're here with John Hugg, attorney at law with Hugg & Associates. John, how often should people be making adjustments to these plans?
The general recommendation would be it should be reviewed every 3 to 5 years. So if you don't have any significant changes in your life, I would say every 3 to 5 years. Other times, if you do have a child, if you have an additional child, those would be reasons to come in and get things reviewed. If you have an unfortunate divorce or something like that, certainly you'll want to make changes then without question. Absolutely make changes at that point, so there's no confusion later on down the line. And then if you have any significant changes in the law, such as tax changes, as we're experiencing, that will come up here on January 1, and at the moment we're not exactly sure what we're going to get.
So major life changes, major political changes, major tax changes. So every year.
Well, yeah. Hey, and from my perspective, every year,
every
6
years,
months,
right?
if you're coming to me.
Into the John, thanks so much for joining us. We do have to go to break, but I think you make a really good point. There are threats that you don't see them. They're not bears coming after you in the woods, but they are real, and especially to your finances. And if you don't know the bear's hiding behind the tree, well, you can't see it.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for joining us. We do have to go to break. When we come back, Heather Moore will join us along with all of our in-studio guests to further the discussion. We'll be right back.